Good afternoon, my name is Ola Tamanova and I'm happy to see everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. It's been 10 years of the war and today is day 467 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by a Russian aggressor, and I traditionally want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about this war and our heroic resistance. Today we have invited you to talk about an important topic. The topic of our panel discussion is LGBT community and society. We will talk about what has changed since the full-scale war outbreak. I want to introduce our speakers today. It's Sovsun, MP, initiator of the draft law on registered partnerships. Joining us online is Alyona Gruzina, culturologist, Gender in Detail communication company. I hope, Miss Alyona, you're hearing us. Andrii Kravchuk, Nash Center, Veteranka Foundation representative. Maksym Potapovych, media communications manager of LGBT plus military community. And Dmytro Havryliuk, the head of executive body of Ukrainian LGBT plus military community. So I want to start with the most important question. What has changed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion? What do you hear in your community? What do you hear around us? Are there any movements in this regards? What are those moves? Are they positive or the other way around? Please. Look, generally what we have to say. The attitude to LGBT community in Ukraine was changing to the better within the last 10 to 15 years. It's not something that has happened suddenly. If we check the sociological reserve within the last 10 to 15 years, the percentage of people who respond positively to this general question, like, are you ready to see your, say, neighbor as a LGBT community representative, now this percentage was increasing. This is a steady trend due to the demand for the freedom, for the liberty, for the respect to the human's dignity. Well, it was all included into this more broad notion, but the full-scale invasion changed the situation in the quality manner. Those who support LGBT community are more numerous than they used to be, say, 3 years ago. And I want to emphasize two factors are the LGBT military, who dare to speak that they exist. They will talk more for themselves, but it was important for the society, because what I can say, even what we say in the parliament, even the conservative deputies, those who say it's not in compliance with the Bible, it's unnatural, I'm just asking them, do you want to say it in the face of an LGBT military? And this is where they stop. So I think that the visual presence in the public space of the LGBT military is something that helped. And another aspect is that under the conditions of the full-scale war, us as a society, we want to demonstrate that we are different from Russia. And since in Russia the homophobic sentiment is a part of national ideology, it's important for us to demonstrate that we are different. It's important for us as the society. This is what's different in us. We are ready to respect the rights of everybody, each and every member of the society. And it's also important for international communication. When we registered this draft law about the registered partnership with the colleagues, a number of the requests from the foreign media was incredible. It was the marker for the Europe, for the civilized community, how Ukraine is different, like why we should support them. Specifically in the countries that were taking it a little bit skeptical, this marker that in Ukraine the human rights are ready to be supported, it was very important. And among the people's deputies, I have to say, we had, now that we're reviewing this draft law in different committees, in one of the committee, head of the committee just said that regardless of my opinion of the LGBT people, I have my tradition, my imagination of it, but since Putin is homophobic, we have to be different, and I urge everybody to support this draft law. So this realization of ourselves other than different from homophobic Russia, this is something that changed the attitude of the people when they say, well, if Putin is such, then we should be different. Miss Alyona, please join our conversation. What will be your sentiment in this regard? Have we changed? Oh, unfortunately, we're not hearing you. Can you please check your sound? We're not hearing you. Our technical team is going to try to fix this. Meanwhile, I will give the floor to Mr. Andrii. Mr. Andrii, what can you say about this? I absolutely agree, Miss Ina. I'm sorry, Ina, not Irina. Yes, the Ukrainian society has grown more tolerant to their compatriots. When the last year we ordered this questioning from the Ukrainian Institute of Sociology, and we repeated the same questions that we used to ask 6 years ago. Us, as the authors and sociologists, we have not believed our eyes because the number of positive responses grew multiple times. And now the vast majority, according to this questioning, they support the rights of LGBT and they take them with understanding to bigger or lesser extent, and those results were then reconfirmed by other questionings, so it's a fact now. This is something that is reality. So Ukrainian society wants to get integrated into Europe. Everybody knows that modern European Union stands for the protection of human rights, specifically LGBT rights. That's the official policy of EU proclaimed by their official bodies. Some governments may not agree with this, but they are a minority. The vast majority of Europe takes LGBT people with understanding. And also, Russia is our key enemy. They are the main provider of homophobic sentiment in the world. There are formal statements by Putin and Patriarch Kirill. Their war is for traditional values. This is what Patriarch used to say, and he kept reiterating this, that they have started this war to help the people of Donbass to make sure that there are no gay parades in the streets of Donetsk. As to the Ukrainian LGBT community, I want to say that with the beginning of the full-scale invasion by Russia, it made the shortcomings of our legislation to surface. We've realized that the absence of the opportunity to register our rights to get the equal rights and obligations, they are very actual during the war. People keep perishing during the war, but they have families left, and those people who are the close ones, those they want to spend the rest of our lives in the eyes of the society, they're strange, they're someone else to them. And this situation has surfaced specifically during these days. We will get back to the topic of the draft law a little bit later, Mr. Maksym, but in your opinion, have we gained the momentum to support the human rights? Do we have this move already? Do you feel any development in this area? Actually, yes, and even before I started working with LGBT military, I worked with Kiev Pride, and there is a negative side to the full-scale invasion, because now the parades, the mass meetings are prohibited. We cannot do it right in the street during this month of June, as people do all around the world. They go out for manifestations, and we've picked the solution. If we cannot use the streets of our cities, we will use the streets of our friends, our partners, and within 2022 and 2023, now there are marches in the countries of European Union in support of Ukraine, including in the support of LGBT military. Talking about LGBT military, I think that the full-scale invasion not like drastically changed, but rather mobilized the society and the community, because we started this battle back in 2014, and the great move was when this full-scale aggression forced the military to become more open, because they realized that in fact they may lose their life, their health, and they want to live in a free country to the best of their capabilities, even though the country does not protect them and they protect the country. Though I think that Dmytro may add something about why LGBT military and how important it is to support them now. Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank everybody who joins the discussion of this issue. I just want to add that in addition to the fact that our community became more visible during the full-scale invasion, we were doing our job, we were involved in improvement of lives of LGBT military, but now, since the 24th of February, it all became more visible. What we do, the way we do it, it all became more general. People see it now. The society in general sees it, and people get involved with their support, with their understanding. In fact, there is nothing horrific about this topic, and people start saying it out loud. They start supporting, they start expressing their real point of view. And it supports our organization, our LGBT military, even morally. We know that the military representatives of LGBT community actively take part in the war, are part of our armed forces, just like Miss Ina said. This visibility that LGBT community gained now, and the representatives of LGBT in the armed forces, how has it happened? Why did you decide to go more to the public space, and how difficult was it for you to undertake this step? Well, first of all, because right now it's actually just as it never was for the people who defend our country. It's about their rights. It's about their right to life that they deserve, the life that they want for themselves, for their future families, with whom they want to spend that life. And coverage of this LGBT military issue is just as actual as never, and the support of this specific draft law, as I would call it, a first step towards implementation in the society of specific concrete tolerance, is the first step on our long way. We've made a long way already, but still there is a long way ahead of us. So talking about what's ahead, we all agree that tolerance has grown in our society, but are there still the discrimination cases left in the armed forces against the representatives of LGBT community? Well, there are existing facts, but both boys and girls, they don't expose this issue, unfortunately. But those problematic moments, the cases that we hear in our organization, we try to cover them and to solve that issue in the most prompt manner possible. And it also adds, you see, people see that there are issues arising, people solve them, and they open up with their problems, with the problems of discrimination that they experience in their lives, in their service. and it gives the society the opportunity to see that LGBT community in the Ukrainian army has problems, but those problems are beginning to be solved. Us as the community, as the organization of LGBT military, we have this community. It's about 300 military who joined us, with a number of these tourists. There is still a lot of homophobic sentiment in the armed forces of Ukraine. It's a very conservative organization. There are military couples, for example, one military, one civilian, and there are couples where both are military. And we have a couple, Pavlo and Vladislav. They're both military. They're open gay couple, and they wanted to serve in the same unit, to support each other, to stay by each other's side. And due to the homophobic sentiment in the armed forces, it's difficult for them to be serving in one unit. There is a huge resistance that they experience. But the bigger discrimination is the absence of these basic rights, which are stipulated in the draft law. I think that Dmytro may tell you more about this. He's a significant other to the military who is in the front line. He was not able to get the compensation just like the partners of other militaries do. Well, it's about my former partner. This person is not alive anymore. On the 20th of December, there was a drone strike on the crew and he burned alive. In my situation, what helped me was that, conditionally speaking, my mother-in-law is normal. So if in the family there is normal communication among the close ones, you will be able to visit the hospital. If there is no such normal good communication, if the family is not aware of your relations, it would be way more difficult. It gave me personally a push to action, an experience, because it's cool that I made it in my case, but there were numerous other situations like this, and there will be a lot more. And in those situations, people may face such problems that even they may not be aware of their loved one, or of the death of their loved one, and they may end up even without opportunity to visit the funeral. Well, first of all, it gives us all the opportunity to think, because this draft law is created in a very diligent and literate manner, because it does not only touch upon the issue of the same-sex relations and same-sex couples. For example, I have an example of a girl who is in relations with a mobilized one, and in fact legally she's nobody to him, and just in the worst case scenario she would not even be able to find out about this worst case scenario. Miss Alyona, if you are with us, please join our conversation. Please share your thoughts with us. It seems like we're not hearing you again, unfortunately. Dear friends, I will ask our team to check the connection once again. We're not hearing the speaker. Miss Ina, please I would like to add a couple of words. I want to thank the guys for sharing their stories. I'm being addressed by the people as people's deputy, and including LGBT military, and the task of our team was to, yes, we understand it's a war, a lot of horrific things are going on, we are advocating the weapons first of all, but there are people who risk their lives for us, and us as a society, we refuse to recognize them, not to give them rights, but just to recognize their existence. And I had an experience of public debate during the live broadcasts where there were representatives of the organizations for traditional values. They say LGBT don't exist. They fled to the West during the first days of war. And when you are personally know the LGBT military, it just doesn't fit in your head. You can't wrap your brain around it. And what these guys do when they recognize it publicly, it's a very brave step. I know a lot of stories when the coming out resulted in aggression against them, but there's a number of positive stories when people were serving in a unit and they were recognized in their unit. It was becoming a method of enlightenment. But Maksym is right that in all of the countries, army is a very conservative community, and there are examples. I'm not gonna say whether numerous or not, but the people had to change their units. They were bullied, so there are different types of education. So I think it's one of the problems. We don't have a standardized protocol of what to do if. For example, in case of the other problems like sexual violence, there are problems with the way the army investigates those issues. But the protocol, for example, what the unit has to do if it turns out that one of their service persons are representatives of an LGBT community. Such protocols don't exist, and it's one of the problems that we now try to communicate to the representatives of the Ministry of Defense. There should be a standardized protocol of behavior. I appreciate the support of the draft law, but the guys are right. It's not the only thing that is necessary, that needs to be done. On the level of the brothers in arms, they should get this equal attitude. It's not unified so far. And I want to add to your question about the change of attitude. We all recognize there is a positive trend that improves this attitude, but we have to remember that it's not universal, and in fact there are specific groups who on contrary get involved in the discussion, and they advocate against LGBT people in general and the draft law specifically, starting with some aggressive right radical groups who may commit acts of violence directly against LGBT, and those acts are not qualified as hate crimes because the parliament is refusing to adopt the law right now. But there are groups that are actively involved in lobbying of acceptance of the appeals from the local communities not to adopt this draft law. And believe me, if you read those letters, this is some medieval thing. It's something savage. And in the country, in the year 2023, in the country which is in war with homophobic Russia, we don't believe that such things exist. And the local communities, the local councils in the West, they adopted, they take those appeals, and the level of support of initiative for the registered partnership is more than 50% there. But the local councils, they take those appeals not to adopt the draft law, a standard Putin propaganda set that is being adopted by the local councils in the Western Ukraine. I want us to think positively, but evaluate situation realistically. We have such cases. There are cases of discrimination of LGBT military, and the hate crimes unfortunately exist, and the problems with the investigation of such crimes, they remain too. Messina, let's talk a little bit more about this draft law. I understand it's important about the registered partnerships, and maybe we will appeal to a more broad audience. What does it take into account? Why is it necessary to be adopted? To what extent is it going to solve the problems that were pronounced by Dmytro and Maksym just now? As I already mentioned, soon it will be a year that we've taken this decision to draw up this draft law. In the first place, to the reaction to the appeals of the LGBT community. Obviously, it creates problems not only for those who are in the ranks of the Ukrainian army, but for the military. It's probably the biggest problem, specifically talking about such rights as a right to visit your loved one in a hospital, and if in the worst case scenario to make the decision about the burial, and the right to the vacation in case of death of a loved one. If such thing happens, if your loved one perishes, officially the state says you don't exist, you don't suffer just because someone perished somewhere, because you're not related in the eyes of the state. And when you think about it, it becomes terrible. And it's very unpleasant perspective. It's a double unfairness, because people risk their lives on a daily basis to make sure we stay alive and we stand as a country. So this is why we started drawing up this law. It took half a year to write the wording. There's a huge number of rights and obligations which are aimed at helping people in exercising their rights. The draft law recognizes the partnership as the family. There are a lot of manipulations in Ukrainian legislation, like matrimony and the family are different categories. If a mother lives with a child, they're a family, even without a husband. If a grandmother educates or raises a child without parents, they are a family. The family are those who live together and have obligations with regard to each other. So our draft law recognizes the partnership as the family. I want to emphasize it once again, because there is discussion among the deputies to make another draft law which does not recognize the partnership as a family, but it's a dangerous track, because in our legislation we have a lot of rights and obligations which are related to the family. In the Constitution, the right not to witness in the court is given to the closest relatives. So if we write something in the law about the partnership but not recognize them as the family, or the right to inherit property without paying taxes, it's related to the family. So this discussion about not assigning them the status of the family, it's very dangerous, but it spreads in the parliament as an alternative, because as if we recognize them as the family, the parliament would not support them. So yes, our draft law recognizes partnership as the family. It provides all the rights and obligations that coincide with the matrimony, with one exception. Those are the rights related to the children. The right to adoption of the children is not being touched upon by the draft law, and so on and so forth. It just doesn't touch those issues. And comparing to the matrimony, the procedure for registration of creation of the partnership and breaking of the partnership, it's easier in terms of registration procedures, and here we were following the best Western practices. In the same way, the partnership is being regulated in France, And in France, like in our draft law, we allow the same-sex couples to establish partnership just like different-sex couples. Like, for example, people may not like matrimony. In France, the Institute of Partnership is so popular that about 40% of the couples, they establish their relations as the partnership, not as a matrimony. And among all the registered partnerships, only 6 to 7% are same-sex partnerships. So for the French, this notion of the matrimony, for different reasons, for example, due to religious reasons, and people may be not religious, or some may have some unpleasant experience of matrimony. So it's not up to us to tell people how to be happy. We just have to remove the obstacles. And we were following the same logic here. We were proposing to legalize their relations as a partnership both for same-sex and different-sex couples. Miss Ina, what's the status of the draft law? For the time being, the draft is being reviewed by the parliament. The main committee who reviews it is the committee for the legal policies, plus 13 another committees. According to the regulation, the review by the additional committees is not necessary, but in view of its size, it touches upon the rights in different spheres and areas, so it would be relevant to review it in other committees. It was reviewed by the Committee of Digital Transformation, or Committee for European Integration, and Committee for Youth and Sports. They all have expressed their support with some minor amendments according to their profile. Such review is not legally mandatory, but it's very useful for a number of reasons. First, because every review in the committee contemplates that we listen to the positions of the ministries about this committee. For example, when we were reviewing the draft by the Committee for Digital Transformation, they had to get the opinion from the Ministry of Digital Transformation, which provided their remarks about how to regulate the issue. For example, for regulating of the request or of the application through DIA. That's the first advantage, to get the professional opinion from different government agencies or ministries. Another advantage of this process, I mean the review in each and every committee, is the involvement of different deputies in this discussion who may have not seen this topic before. They may not be aware that 56% of Ukrainians support it, that there are LGBT military who suffer from not support of this draft, and every such review is the opportunity to get different people engaged in the dialogue, and this is how we use it as the opportunity for advocating the issue, because when eventually it will be reviewed in the parliament, the most people should understand what's going on, and we do everything possible to make sure that the decision is positive. The European Court for Human Rights solution is very convenient in this regard. It happens, it helps a lot us in the parliament. Mr. Andrii, please tell us what about this judgment, and then we will ask you to what extent this draft law complies with your vision. Well, the judgment was approved a year ago. Milovakhin and Varkin against Ukraine. Andrii Milovakhin is the director of my organization, the coordinator of our world LGBT organization. Andriy Markev, after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, went to the National Guard. He was in the Lviv region. After the rocket strike of his unit, he got a heart stroke and was decommissioned due to disability. First, it was a strategic case, it has to defend the right not of that specific gay couple, but of all the Ukrainian LGBT community. And the fact that the European Court would approve the judgment in favor of the couple, it was clear 1 year ago when they approved the similar judgment against Russia, but Russia would not comply with the judgment, but Ukraine cannot afford it. Well, what is supposed to be done as a result of this judgment? The state of Ukraine will pay a compensation in amount of 5,000 euro to each of them, which they will forward to support the Ukrainian armed forces. But before Ukraine approves those registered partnership or matrimonies or whatever they will be called, until that very moment Ukraine will be violating the Convention of European Union for Human Rights. It means that other gay couples may apply to the Court for Human Rights because their rights are discriminated, and it will also entail unpleasant political consequences for Ukraine until we approve certain laws. In short, Ukraine cannot become a member of European Union until we approve that law. It's not formal, but it's an informal requirement by the European Union, who let the Ukrainian government understand that Ukraine has to be modern country which recognizes the modern standards in the area of human rights. If it's a country which is a part of European Union, for example, we are being told that Hungarian government, Polish governments, they don't recognize those standards, but they are already a part of European Union, so they're facing different problems. Now European Committee sues them, and the government or European Union doesn't want to see yet another Hungary among them. They don't need more of those problems, so this problem has to be solved before Ukraine submits an application for the full-fledged membership. And again, it's the requirement by the international partners of Ukraine, who are strategic allies, such countries as the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and Norway, which are not part of the European Union. They are the key strategic allies of Ukraine, and they support the LGBT rights, and they support the approval of this draft law. So this judgment by the European Court for Human Rights, it pushes Ukraine not to only prepare to live by the European standards, but to start living by them already. So this draft law will help us solve these issues. Yes, it's a very well developed draft. It's very holistic, comprehensive. It covers almost all the areas where the discrimination may arise due to non-recognition of this status, same-sex couples. I know that now there is an alternative draft being developed by the Ministry of Justice. I'm not familiar with its content, but I want to say, but it doesn't matter which draft will be adopted. It just should work. It should be efficient. This is what the judgment of the European Court for Human Rights says. It says that the legislation that is supposed to legalize the same-sex couples, it shouldn't be symbolic. It should provide them with the basic rights that the married couples have. Maksym and Dmytro, I would like to hear your opinion. We are, as an organization of LGBT military, we think that it's not only the representatives of the community who will benefit from it, but the state in total. For example, like Ministry of Defense, they issued a statement that they do not support the draft, and their main argument was that they have no data about thousands of LGBT representatives in the ranks of Ukrainian army, but there was no relevant questioning ever done. And now we get the information that in the armed forces now there is questioning about the attitude of the military to the community and to the draft law, and to find out whether they experience discrimination. And we get information from our brothers in arms that about 80% of the military in those questioners, they responded positively as to the draft and as to the community, which is very comforting, because many may say that if the military are against, the government would not support it. The military are the main voice, but in fact the society and the military are ready, and such a conservative structure as the army is ready by now. And it will solve a number of issues, and we cannot wait until the end of the war to get this draft law adopted, because our military, including the couples, are getting symbolically engaged, because they see that their heterosexual brothers in arms, they get in matrimony. Last year there was a matrimony boom in Ukraine, including among military, and our military, which belong to the community, they want to feel equally protected, and the partnership is not something symbolical, as symbolical in our society as matrimony, and I think that the adoption of it is way better in our society. So some activists, they say we don't need partnership, we need matrimony, but I understand that we cannot change constitution during the law, because it says in the constitution that matrimony can be entered in by men and women, and what we fight for is for the people to get back to the society where people may be present with PTSD and other problems, and we would like for them to return to more democratic Ukraine. And this establishment of Ukraine as a democratic state, we try to communicate it to the Ministry of Defense, that it influences the image of Ukraine in front of our partners. Our key partners, US, Britain, EU, they are the countries which stipulate the human rights as fundamentals. And if Ukraine supports this draft law, it will be a powerful step to demonstrate that Ukraine does not equal Russia. We are so different that even during the war we are ready to defend the rights of the marginalized groups. And it may be one of the reasons to reinforce and to expedite this or that kind of help, because in the eyes of our partners we establish the opinion that Ukraine equals democracy, so there is no time to wait. We've been waiting for more than 10 years. We were waiting for the Istanbul Convention ratification for 10 years, and eventually Ukraine was able to adopt it, so why cannot we adopt the partnerships? It's very important. Thank you for your opinion. I would like to add that adoption of this draft law will give a small push to changes in some other areas, some other structures of our country. Why? Because, for example, how it can touch the military. Look, we have a conditional understanding that men, the husband and wife, they cannot serve in submission to each other, and in case of same-sex couples it's not being taken into account, and it may push to reformation of Ukrainian army, and which is necessary because we have the logbook for registration of logbooks. Well, it's cool, but we have to leave behind this Soviet Union in your brain. And this draft law will be the first step to make it. It will be the first step to the changes. It not in violation of the institute of the family, of the matrimony, but there will be a lot of changes to take place in our country, not only for the people who live and continue living in our country, who will help to rebuild our country, but for those who really need it, and such people are numerous. Thank you. Dear colleagues, if you have any questions, please join our conversation. Good afternoon, Anna Shershin, Ukrinform. Is there still a discrimination of LGBT representatives after coming out in case of their application for jobs? I will respond it because my organization is specialized in monitoring and reporting of such cases of violation of LGBT rights in Ukraine. So within the last couple of years, we see the tendency to decrease of the hate crimes and the cases of discrimination against LGBT representatives of Ukraine. We thought that it was mostly related with the COVID epidemics and then the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and obviously those factors, they do influence it, but now we see that the attitude of the Ukrainian society to the LGBT representative changed a lot, so I think it influences a lot. There are still cases, but what spheres are close to LGBT? Well, there are no such areas. Theoretically, there are no limitations as to the LGBT representatives. Discrimination is prohibited by a number of indicators, and sexual orientation and gender identity is included in those indicators, and our code of laws for labor, it includes this prohibition of discrimination, because, for example, in case you're being fired, you're not being communicated that you're being fired for your sexual orientation, and in the majority of cases people do not want to defend their rights, they don't want publicity, and it remains undocumented by the police. They don't have relevant statistics, for example. The only area it's theoretically prohibited for the open LGBT to work in is the Ukrainian church, but is their internal issue. The government does not interfere. They can regulate their relations. However, in practice, we know that a lot of Ukrainian bishops are gay. As to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, there was a journalist who created the map of this church paraphia with the indication of the sexual orientation, like pink, blue, and yellow, and Ukraine was mostly blue there, which meant they were gay. Dear friends, if we have more questions on the floor, please go ahead, and if our speakers have anything to add, we'll give floor to them. I will add a couple of words to what Maksym said, that the protection of the LGBT military rights is not only about their rights, but it's about the protection of our rights as well, not only because we demonstrate to the military that we care about them, but also in the international dimension, like the judgment of the European Court for Human Rights that Andrii mentioned, but also that the judgments of or regulations of other countries, they show that if Ukraine adopts that law, it will be additional argument for the politicians in other countries to demand the support for Ukraine. I will give you a couple of examples, quite obvious. Everybody knows that United States provides us with the most of the weapons. They are our biggest partner, and there is definitely a consensus between administration of Biden and opposition, which control a part of the Congress in support of Ukraine. But there are certain groups, even inside Democratic Party, which are not very good with the idea of providing weapons to Ukraine, including the progressive part. They say that we need peace. Yes, we do need peace, but we cannot discuss their position. We definitely need more weapons. So they have this specific stance of the international policy that has to be worked on. I'm not justifying it, but I know for sure that for them the LGBT issue is very sensitive and important, and for them, if Ukraine adopts that law, for them it will be the final period why they have to support Ukraine in counterbalance to Russia. Again, I'm not justifying their current stance, but I'm explaining that the countries, they have their internal policies, and the adoption of this legislation will be an additional argument for them to support Ukraine. There are other countries where, well, we understand that it's obvious for us. For example, why should we get more weapons? But in some countries there is still a discussion going on, including Germany and France. But there the majority of the society adheres to the opinion that the LGBT rights should be supported, and in case they see that Ukraine stands for the same values, it should be the reason to continue supporting Ukraine. It's not like we support Ukraine only because Russia captured those territories illegally and they continue committing crimes, but because they feel that Ukrainians are the same as us. And from that point of view, this judgment by the European Court for Human Rights, it has the legal dimension, but it has also the political dimension, and if Ukraine ignores this judgment, it will be a very bad signal, not only from the point of view of the rights of the LGBT people in Ukraine, but our partners will see to what extent Ukraine is ready to get together with the club of civilized countries. You know, this international policy dimension is very important, and in communication with our international partners, apart from the list of weapons that we need is the first item always, but I also always remind them of this draft law and LGBT military, and I got requests from those countries to organize the visits of those LGBT military to those countries, to advocate for the weapons for Ukraine, not to advocate for the gay rights, but to advocate the weapons for Ukrainian armed forces, to show that there are gays in the ranks of Ukrainian army. They say that there are politicians in our countries who say that this is something to demonstrate why the weapons should be given to Ukraine. Ms. Ina, the last question will be to you. How optimistic are you about the adoption of this draft? Well, what I can say, we will continue working until this law is adopted. No matter whether it will be my draft or another alternative draft, if my task was only to break the ice and to say that you can come up with such an initiative in the parliament, it will be good enough. But what I want to make sure that it happens the soonest possible. So again, whether it will be my draft or someone else's, it's not so important. What's important is the terms. The people who are in the front lines, they cannot wait until the end of war. It may happen that they may not make it until the end of the war. It's a horrific reality, and it's not timely to tell them, like, let's wait until the end of the war and then we'll see what happens, because they don't say it in the same way to us. Like, you sort it out with your draft law, and then we will see whether we should defend you or not. So it's not about whose draft, but it's about how soon one draft is already registered. It can be discussed in the parliament within a week. It would be the fastest track, but I will be honest with you. If this draft is being voted in the parliament now, I'm afraid it would not get the necessary number of votes. We have to keep working in the parliament, we have to continue convincing, we have to work with the society, with the public, to talk about it, because the deputies, they try to understand the situation in the society, to what extent their voting will reflect on their support, and it's important. I keep saying this to my colleagues, the majority of the Ukrainians support it, and if you act against it, you you're doing it wrong in the political perspective. If there are 56% who support this, you are wrong not supporting it. But many people refer to the position of the Council of Churches, it's like they're against. But until now, those who were actively against this draft, they were more noticeable. All those applications by the local councils, they were covered, but the fact that the majority of people, in fact, they do support, it did not create any news cases that their parliamentary groups could react to. But the existence of the LGBT militaries helps us a lot for those MPs to say that you cannot close your eyes in front of this problem. There is a necessity to support this draft with your colleagues in the parliament. I cannot forecast it, but I can say that the judgment by the European Court for Human Rights will help us a lot, because we are bound to adopt some kind of legislation in this regard. What the court says, that the Ukrainian government was trying to adopt such law, because we have such plan for 7 or 8 years by now. And if Ukraine will try to report just with the phrase that we're working on it, so the court will say that we know that you were working on it lately, but we need you to adopt the law, not to work on it. So it creates some legal pressure. But I've heard something from my colleagues that it's not mandatory for fulfillment. And I remind them, there is one country that does not comply with the judgments of the European Court for Human Rights, and they are called Russia. So I think this judgment of the court will help us, and these guys, they help us too, and the journalists who give publicity to this issue, they help us not less than the others. I want to thank you for this important conversation. For many of us Ukrainians and just human beings who lived during the war, sometimes there is a moment to re-evaluate our values, and one of the most important values is compliance with the human rights. And I hope that in our country soon every person may say that their rights are protected. I would want to add a couple of words about this court judgment and the international policy. So this judgment about Ukraine, it was based on the judgment of the broad chamber of the European Court for Human Rights. It was approved back in January this year. The higher chamber of the European Court for Human Rights, their judgment cannot be disputed. So that judgment was saying that absence of any form of legalization of partnerships, it's in violation of the European Charter for Human Rights. So all the countries, they either have to approve relevant legislation or they have to leave the organization, just like Russia did. We have imagination that the same-sex partnerships are something that only exists in the West, but no, it's something that exists in the Christian Orthodox countries such as Montenegro or Greece or Cyprus. Even Slovenia adopted same-sex matrimonies. Same-sex partnerships exist in Czech Republic for a long time. Lithuania and Latvia are currently reviewing the similar drafts that are about to be adopted. The Latvians, they've voted an open gay into the president's office recently, and now all of the America recognizes same-sex partnerships. Ukraine is a part of a civilized world, and we just do the same thing that the other people in the civilized world do. We keep developing. It's Russia that is anomaly. It's homophobic sentiment that is the anomaly. The protection of human rights, including the rights of LGBT, is a standard. It's normal. Thank you. Let's wrap up on this note. Dear colleagues, I'm reminding you at 19:30, we will announce the Invictus Games national team to represent Ukraine in Düsseldorf this year in the competition, and we want to thank our armed forces for this opportunity to hold events like this. Thank you for staying tuned, and glory to Ukraine.